My name's Rhiannon Firth. I'm a senior researcher at the University of Essex. My work's on utopianism, anarchism and mutual aid. And my loose brief for doing the bedtime story was to select a reading that attempts to imagine a time after the health crisis, so a sort of post-COVID-19 utopianism. And the text that I'm reading from today is, you can't even see the title on here, it's called Bolobolo by PM, but I love this book so much that my copy's falling apart. I think I got it second hand and it was quite well loved before then, but yeah, it's totally falling apart, so hopefully it will hold it together for this reading. And the reason I chose this text is because it's my favourite written anarchist utopia. So I emphasise written because many anarchist utopias aren't written down. They're practiced in the here and now. So things like intentional communities or sort of do-it-yourself social centres and things are often seen as anarchist utopias. And hippie communes and communities that organise non-hierarchically are often seen as anarchist utopias because they try and live the change they want to see in the here and now rather than deferring it to the future or waiting for a revolution. This ties in with anarchist theory because anarchists don't like to defer to the authority of a vanguard to free them. So another example of anarchist utopia is the practice of mutual aid. So last time I read, for this series, I read Colin Ward, who finds examples of anarchist utopias in all around him, wherever he sees people cooperating and helping each other. However, this anarchist utopia that I'm looking at this time is a bit different because it does project desires into the future rather than attempting to live them in the present. So anarchists are usually about be the change you want to see in the world and sort of live it in the here and now. But this one's about the future. It's kind of the author's idea for and his vision for city planning, architecture and property relations. And he presents a sort of detailed design or a blueprint rather than a democratic process that's decided by everyone. So I thought it's particularly appropriate for the Architecture Foundation because he talks in a lot of detail about design of cities and so on. This is my so it's. But how does he avoid it being sort of vanguardist? So I'm going to have a look at it. But my favourite thing about this utopia is that while the author's a visionary and he talks about visions, he avoids imposing a singular vision of the good life upon us. And he proposes a sort of quite simple framework within which anything can happen. So authoritarian things can happen too, but only as a sort of form of play or even sexual kink, because everything's voluntary and based on consent and free choice. So the book is so simplistic and beautifully written, it could probably... it's really easy to read. It's a really good bedtime story, I think. But I think even though it's very simple and easy to read, I think what the author does is incredibly clever and shouldn't be underestimated. So it's written by a guy called Hans Widmer, and he uses the pseudonym PM for this book. He's Swiss and born in 1947, but I don't know a lot else about him. So I'm going to start where he discusses the concept of the bolo. But for context, he's already told us, he sort of invents a language, and he's already told us about the concept of the ibu, which basically means the individual person. So he's talked about, in the extract from about the start, he's talked about the ibu, which is the person, and now he's going to talk about the bolo, which is the community, really. So he's saying, I'll start now. The ibu is still around, refusing nothingness, hoping for a new, better nightmare. It's still lonely, but it believes it can overcome its loneliness by some agreements with the other 4 billion ibus. Are they out there? You can never be sure. So, together with 300 to 500 ibus, the ibu joins a bolo. The bolo is its basic agreement with other ibus, a direct personal context for living, producing, dying. The bolo replaces the old agreement called money. In and around the bolo, the ibus can get their daily 2,000 calories, a living space, medical care, the basics of survival, and indeed much more. The ibu is born in a bolo. It passes its childhood there and is taken care of when it's ill. It learns certain things, tinkers around, it's hugged and stroked when sad, takes care of other ibus, hangs out, disappears. No ibu can be expelled from a bolo, but it's always free to leave and return. The bolo is the ibu's home on our spaceship. The ibu isn't obliged to join a bolo. It can stay truly alone, form smaller groups, conclude special agreements with bolos. If a substantial part of all ibus unite in bolos, money economies die and can never boom and can never return. The near complete self-sufficiency of the bolo guarantees its independence. The bolos are the core of a new, personal, direct way of social exchange. Without bolos, the money economy must return, and the ibu will be alone again with its job and its money, dependent on pensions and the state and police. The self-sufficiency of the bolo is based on 2 elements: on the buildings and equipment for housing and crafts, sibi, and on a piece of land for the production of most of its food, kodu. The agricultural basis can also consist of pastures, mountains, fishing and hunting grounds, palm tree groves, algae cultures, gathering areas, etc., according to geographical conditions. The bolo is largely self-sufficient so far as the daily supply of basic food is concerned. It can repair and maintain its buildings and tools by itself. In order to guarantee hospitality, sila, it must be able to feed an additional 30 to 50 guests or travellers out of its own resources. Self-sufficiency isn't necessarily isolation or self-restraint. The bolos can conclude agreements of exchange with other bolos and get a larger variety of foods or services. See Fino. This cooperation is bi- or multilateral, not planned by a centralised organisation. It's entirely voluntary. The bolo itself can choose its degree of autarky or independence according to its cultural identity or nima. Size and number of inhabitants of bolos can be roughly identical in all parts of the world. Its basic functions and obligations are the same everywhere, but its territorial, architectural, organisational, cultural beliefs and other forms of values, if there are any, can be manifold. No bolo looks like any other, just as no ibu is identical with any other. Every ibu and bolo has its own identity, and bolobolo is not a system, but a patchwork of microsystems. Bolos don't have to be built in empty spaces. They're much more a utilisation of existing structures. In larger cities, a bolo can consist of 1 or 2 blocks, of a smaller neighbourhood, of a complex of adjacent buildings. You just have to build connecting arcades, overpasses, using first floors as communal spaces, making openings in certain walls, etc. So a typical neighbourhood could be transformed into a bolo like this. We've got a picture here, if my book doesn't fall apart. There we go. So larger and higher housing projects can be used as vertical bolos. In the countryside, a bolo corresponds to a small town, to a group of farmhouses or a valley. A bolo needn't be architecturally unified. In the South Pacific, a bolo is a coral island or even a group of smaller atolls. In the desert, the bolo might not even have a precise location. Rather, it's the route of the nomads who belong to it. Maybe all members of the bolo meet only once or twice a year. On rivers or lakes, bolos can be formed with boats. There can be bolos in a former factory building, palaces, caves, battleships, monasteries, under the ends of the Brooklyn Bridge, in museums, zoos, at Knott's Berry Farm, or Fort Benning, in the Iowa State House, shopping malls, the University of Michigan football stadium, Folsom Prison. The bolos will build their nests everywhere. The only general features are their size and functions. Some possible shapes of bolos. So we've got some more pictures here. That's a possible bolo. Here's some more possible bolos. Incredibly abstract diagrams. I'm not quite sure what he's getting at with these. I think he's just trying to show how diverse the bolos can be. And then here's a typical Middle European bolo. So that's the Middle European bolo. Okay, so the section on bolos has finished. And I'm going to move on to the next chapter, which is on, I told you he invents his own language. This one's on sila. So from the point of view of the Ibu, the bolo's function is to guarantee its survival, to make its life enjoyable, to give it a home or hospitality when it's travelling. The agreement between the whole of the bolos, bolobolo, and a single Ibu is called sila. As the Ibu hasn't any money, nor a job, nor any obligation to live in a bolo, all the bolos have to guarantee hospitality to arriving single Ibus. Every bolo is a virtual hotel. Any Ibu a virtual non-paying guest. We're all only guests on this planet anyway. Money is a social agreement whose observance is enforced by the police, justice, prisons, psychiatric hospitals. It is not natural. As soon as these institutions collapse or malfunction, money loses its value. Nobody can catch the thief. And everybody who doesn't steal is a fool. As the money agreement functions badly, it's in fact about to ruin the planet and its inhabitants. There is some interest in replacing it with a new arrangement, sila, the rules of hospitality. So sila is what's going to replace money, and it's kind of like a gift exchange. But sila contains the following agreements. Taku. Every Ibu gets a container from its bolo that measures 50 by 50 by 100 centimetres, and over whose contents it can dispose as it will. Yalu. Any Ibu can get from any bolo at least one daily ration of 2,000 calories of local food. Ganu. Every Ibu can get housing for at least one day in any bolo. Bet. Every Ibu is entitled to appropriate medical care in any bolo. Fasi. Every Ibu can travel anywhere at any moment. There are no borders. Nemo. Every Ibu can choose, practice and propagandise for its own way of life. Clothing, style, language, sexual preferences, religion, philosophy, ideology, opinions, etc. Wherever it wants and as it likes. Yaka. Every Ibu can challenge any other Ibu or a larger community to a duel according to these rules. Nugo. Every Ibu gets a capsule with a deadly poison and can commit suicide whenever it wants. It can also demand aid for this purpose. The real basis of the sila are the bolos, because single Ibus wouldn't be able to guarantee these agreements on a permanent basis. Sila is a minimal guarantee of survival offered by the bolos to their members and to a certain proportion of guests. A bolo can refuse sila if there are more than 10% guests. A bolo has to produce 10% more food, housing, medicine, etc. than it needs for its stable members. Larger communities, like the Taiga or Voodoo, handle more resources should certain bolos have surpluses. or if more than 10% guests show up. Why should the bolos respect hospitality rules? Why should they work for others, for strangers? Bolos consist of ibus, and these ibus are potential guests or travellers too. Everybody can take advantage of hospitality. The risk of abuse or exploitation by the resident ibus, by the travelling ibus, is very low. First, a nomadic lifestyle has its own disadvantages, since you can then never participate in the richer inner life of a bolo. A travelling ibu has to adapt to a new cuisine and culture, cannot take part in long-term enterprises, and can always be put on a minimum ration. On the other side, travellers can also benefit the visited community. Travelling can even be considered a form of work. He puts it in quotes. Travellers are necessary for the circulation of news, fashions, ideas, know-how, stories, products, etc. Guests are interested in filling these functions because they can expect better than minimal hospitality. Hospitality and travelling are a level of social exchange. A certain pressure to respect hospitality is exerted on the bolos by munu, honour or reputation. The experiences had by travellers to a bolo are very important, since ibus can travel very far and talk about them anywhere. Reputation is crucial because possible mutual agreements between bolos are influenced by it. Nobody would like to deal with an unreliable, unfriendly bolo. As there is no more anonymous mediation by the circulation of money, personal impressions and reputation are essential again. In this regard, bolos are like aristocratic lineages, and their image is formed by honour. Okay, so we're on to the next chapter, which is called Taku, and I'm showing it because there's a picture of a taku here. It's a box. So the first and most remarkable component of sila is the taku, a container made of solid sheet metal or wood that looks like this. I just showed you it. According to the customs of its bolo, every ibu gets a taku. Whatever fits into the taku is the ibu's exclusive property. The rest of the planet is used and held together. Only the ibu has access to things contained in its taku. Nobody else. It can put in it what it wants. It can carry the taku with itself. And no ibu has any right, under any circumstances whatsoever, to inspect its contents or to ask for information about it. Not even in cases of murder or theft. The taku is absolutely unimpeachable, holy, taboo, sacrosanct, private, exclusive, personal. But only the taku. The ibu can store it in dirty clothes or machine... The ibu can store in it dirty clothes or machine guns, drugs or old love letters, snakes or stuffed mice, diamonds or peanuts, stereotapes or stamp collections. We can only guess. As long as it doesn't stink or make noise, i.e. exert influences beyond itself, anything can be in it. As the ibu might be very obstinate, ibus being notoriously particular and perverse, it needs some property. Maybe the idea of property is just a temporary degeneration caused by civilization, but who knows? The taku is the pure, absolute and refined form of property, but also its limitation. All the ibus together could still imagine to own the whole planet if that helps make them happy. The taku could be important for the ibu, helping it remember, for example, that it isn't an abu, ubu, gagu or something else equally unclear, unstable or indefinable. In fact, the single ibu has many other opportunities for minimal security about its identity. Mirrors, friends, psychiatrists, clothes, tapes, diaries, scars, birthmarks, photos, souvenirs, letters, prayers, dogs, computers, wanted circulars, etc. The ibu doesn't need objects in order to not lose its identity in a general ecstasy. Yet the loss of intimate things could be very disagreeable and therefore should be protected against. Maybe the ibu needs secret intercourse with obscure caskets, collections, fetishes, books, amulets, jewels, trophies and relics, so it can believe itself something special. It needs to show to other ibus when it wants to prove its trust. Only what is secret and taboo can really be shown. Everything else is evident, dull, without charm or glamour. Like unlimited property, the Taku brings some risks too, though these are now more concrete and direct. The Taku can contain weapons, poisons, magical objects, dynamite, maybe unknown drugs, but the Taku can never exert the unconscious, uncontrolled social domination that money and capital do today. There is a limited danger, so trust, reputation and personal relationships will still prove their strength. Okay, so I'm going to just a couple more minutes on the Kana. So this is a very short one. The last chapter I'm going to read of the book, which is falling apart. So Kana. The Kana might be the most frequent and practical subdivision of a bolo, since the bolo is probably too large for immediate living together. A Kana consists of 15 to 30 ibus, and a bolo contains about 20 Kanas. A Kana occupies a larger house in a city, or a couple of houses combined into a single household. It corresponds to a hamlet, a hunting group, a kinship group, a community. The Kana is organised around the inner domestic or hut tent boat life, yet it is completely defined by the lifestyle and cultural identity of its bolo. It cannot be independent in its supply of food or goods, for it's too small and therefore too unstable, as the experiences of the 1960s alternative communes show. According to the bolo lifestyle, there can be more arrangements beside the Kana. Couples, triangles, nuclear families, parenthoods, households, teams, etc. A bolo can also consist of 500 single ibus who live together in a hostel or a monastery, each on its own, cooperating only on a minimal level to guarantee survival and hospitality. The degree of collectivity or individualism is only limited by these basic necessities. An ibu can find the bolo or Kana it likes, or found new ones. Okay, so I'm going to end it there, I think. I hope you enjoyed that snippet. Just for those who joined late, I was reading from PM's Bolobolo, which is a fantastic anarchist utopia. And that's the back cover, which has got some examples of the kind of bolos. So I'm just going to read from the back cover, which is also part of the book later on that I didn't quite get to, where he lists some ideas of the kinds of bolos that you can get. So he says, in a larger city we could find the following bolos: alco bolo, sim bolo, les bolo, play bolo, no bolo, sado bolo, maso bolo, blue bolo, dia bolo, Marl bolo, Marx bolo, anarcho bolo, Incapa bolo, Herb bolo, Jesu bolo, Krishna bolo, and so on. All assisting in the substruction of the capitalist and or socialist planetary work machine. Okay, so I'm going to finish now. Thanks everyone for joining me, and yeah, read the book. It's fantastic. Thanks again.